Welcome to From Here to Eternity, a Gateway Seminary podcast about the nations. My name is Phil. I'm the host. I'm a professor of missions at Gateway Seminary, and until recently, I lived overseas for around 20 years. In this podcast, we address topics related to the cross-cultural spread of the gospel from here in California, across the U.S., and throughout the world. Today, we have Dr. Captain Steeeve Scheibner, a former Navy pilot and current pilot for a major commercial airline. He has a doctorate from Gordon Conwell Seminary. He's married with 8 children, and he has an amazing story about 9/11 that we will link below. His YouTube channel is one of the most popular channels that's around. He has well over 750,000 followers, and his videos have been viewed by over 140 million people. He talks about topics related to flying, and when I started first watching your videos, I wasn't sure, who is this? He's funny, but he's respectful. He doesn't use foul language. Could this guy be a Christian? And I Googled you some more, and I found out that you were, and I was like, wow, this is amazing. So thank you. Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Hey, can we just first talk about how you came to faith in Christ? Can you share your testimony with us?
Sure. I was an absolutely unchurched kid. The classic, never went to church except maybe a couple times on Easter, I think. I remember growing up when I was like 6 or 7 years old. I remember the neighbors taking me along with their son, my friend, to church. And I went to Sunday school a few times at that church. But over the years, no exposure to church at all, completely unchurched. And then when I got to high school, I was in my senior year. I remember the first day of my senior year, I walked in the school, you're a senior, you got some swag now at this point. And there was a guy standing in the lobby, and he was a little bit older than me, not a lot, but he, big old mustache, and it was the 70s. I asked him if he was a new teacher, and he said no. And I couldn't figure out why he was there. He obviously wasn't a student. He was just hanging out in the lobby. And so day after day, he'd be there in the morning, talking to kids. And I found out he was a leader with Young Life. And Young Life is an international ministry to teenagers, basically. And they were starting a Young Life club at that school. Now, back in those days, I don't know how they do it anymore, but they'd let the Young Life leaders just greet kids in the morning. So he and I built a relationship. His name's Scott. Scott and I got to become best friends. He's the guy that introduced me to the gospel. And I heard for the very first time in my life that I was a sinner, that Jesus Christ hung and bled on the cross to cover my sins, and that I could have a relationship with God through Jesus Christ, right? So after hearing the whole gospel put together, I was a little bit resistant at first. I was proud. And then it took me about a month of kind of wrestling with that whole idea that I could actually have a relationship with God. I got invited to a Bible study, of all things, still wasn't saved. And I was on my way there, and I was walking up Wendy Frank's driveway. That was her name. And at 6:50 p.m., just prior to the Bible study starting at 7 o'clock, and I thought I'd better do business with the Lord now. And so I stopped and I prayed the sinner's prayer. I told the Lord I was a sinner, asked him to forgive me of my sin, and asked him to be Lord and master of my life. And at that point, I remember feeling like a ton of bricks was lifted off my shoulders. And I felt really fantastic. And then my friend Scott, my Young Life leader, saw me there, and he said, "Hey, you're here." He was kind of halfway surprised I showed up. And I said, "Hey, I just trusted Christ." He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah, just like right now, like 30 seconds ago." So he kind of walked me through the whole thing, and that was 47 years ago. And so, it's been a journey ever since, but the Lord's never left me, and he's never forsaken me. And here I am, almost 65 years old and still walking with the Lord.
So you got saved your senior year in high school. Then what led you to the career path that you're on? I mean, you end up going to the Navy. Was that like right after high school, or did you get married first? How did all that work out?
Yeah, it was. I had a pretty traditional journey. I finished high school that year, obviously. and went right off to college. Kind of floundered in my walk with the Lord at first. I hadn't been discipled. I didn't know the front end of the Bible from the back. But I came back after about a year away at school, got plugged into Young Life and got discipled, started being a Young Life leader. Did that for the next 3 to 3.5 years until I graduated from college with an undergrad degree. It was 1982 at that time. The job market wasn't real great, so I was looking for a job. My best friend was in the Navy, and he'd said to me, "Hey, go down to the recruiter and tell him you want to be a pilot." So I did. I went down, and one thing led to another. I ended up getting accepted into the pilot program. I went to Pensacola, Florida, got trained. A year and a half after that, I earned my wings. I had an 8-year active duty career, and just prior to getting my wings is when I married my college sweetheart. So she and I had met at Young Life, of all things, in college, and got married just as I was kind of getting my naval career started. And now, all these years later, I ended up going from the Navy to the airlines. She and I have been married 41 years, and we had 8 children altogether.
Having 8 children, and you homeschool during this largely, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Now, which we homeschool as well. It's one of the things that living in a bunch of different countries, it helped with our consistency with education and all that. But with 8 children and homeschooling and you traveling as much as you did, that must have been a lot on your wife. And how was she able to handle all that with you being gone? Just homeschooling enough is a major responsibility. How did she work? How did that all? Talk to me about your family dynamics and how all that worked.
Yeah, well, she's a fantastic lady, and one of the things that attracted me to her was not only just her appearance. She's a very beautiful woman, but also her intelligence and her. This is going to sound like a strange word. The women aren't going to think this is a great word, but she was extremely adaptable. She's the kind of person that doesn't get caught off guard very easily. She will figure something out on her own. She didn't really need me, but as a team, we worked together well. That character quality of hers was really terrific for the lifestyle that she and I were going to lead going forward. Being in the military, you're gone a lot. You do 6 to 9 month deployments repeatedly. Then when you're home, you're away for a week or 2 at a time. You work long hours. The airlines are a little different in terms of you're not gone for 6 months at a time, but you're gone for 3 or 4 days at a time. And you do that 4 or 5 times a month. So I'm constantly, we call it blast off and reentry. I'm constantly blasting off and reentering. But she was really terrific at running the house and also making me feel like I had a valued opinion, because you can imagine that, if I'm gone most of the time, and when I do come home, I feel like a guest in my own home. She always made me feel like I was the head of the household, and that she never, kind of put me in a place and said, "Hey, I run this place." Never anything like that. Really, really incredible lady. And now we've been married 41 years, and I describe her as the fair and lovely Mrs. Captain Steeeve. And she's just absolutely adorable. If you met her, you would love her.
So, how would you? Many missionaries, do a lot. Work at a seminary, and so we have a lot of missionaries coming in and coming out. Some going overseas for the first time that are having kids and doing homeschool. How would you advise them? It's a bit of a different scenario, but living in a different context, always mobile. Could you give them some advice just based on your own experience about how they should homeschool and what things they said they should do to help with that?
Right. Well, you got to be a team. You have to both be on the same page. And homeschooling is as much about parenting as it is about education. So I think the first thing is get on the same page about your parenting style, how you want to approach your children. Be the person that's looking. In the military, it's called having the other person's six, right? Having their back. And you have a wingman that's always looking out over your shoulder to make sure that you're okay. And we do that for each other. So I think I saw a lot of, when I went through seminary and in the years after, we had contact with seminary couples. And there was a lot of couples that basically the woman would say, "Hey, look, this is my husband's thing, not mine." and he's going to seminary, and he wants to have a church someday, but I'm not sure, I want to be part of that. And so if you're just along for the ride, you're not going to be very successful at it. It's going to put tremendous stress on your marriage. It is a family that ministers, right? So my entire family, when I had my church, my entire family was part of that process, especially my wife. And her role in the church as the senior pastor's wife, I thought was much harder than my role, because I've got the title and the position and the authority to act on certain things. She would take second party offense for me. She would see people attacking me, but she didn't have the position to kind of fight back at all. And so that was difficult for her. And I had to keep my eye on her to make sure that her emotions and her mental state stayed healthy. And there were times where we both helped each other out in that regard. There were dark moments in full-time ministry. And so again, I think for seminary couples, missionary couples, anybody that's going to be in any sort of full-time ministry, you have to be each other's biggest cheerleader, and you have to be on the team. You can't be saying that's her thing or that's his thing. You're not going to survive the ministry if you do that.
You being a pastor, it reminds me, my dad was a pastor. I was a PK for forever. Dad was a pastor in New England. And that reminds me of a question that I wanted to ask you. Is like, with your children growing up, being pastors' kids as well, how did you protect them from like the not so nice side of being in pastoral ministry?
Yeah, I wish I had been better at that. I think, looking back, if there's any regrets, I probably didn't protect them as much as I could have. Uh, Having a solid family environment at home is a good protection, right? Because they know, with a strong family identity, they know that whatever somebody might say to them at church or in any other venue of life, they've always got their family to fall back on. So that's number one, is having a good, strong family identity. And instead of your peer group being your comfort, your family is. Homeschooling really helps with that. Not going to the public school and having that larger peer interaction helped. I think the other is, when I got wrapped up in the church, there was things that seemed so important at the time. I didn't keep as watchful an eye as I could have on my kids and what people were saying to them that was out of line. I as they became adults and they shared some of that stuff with me later, I apologized to them. I said, kids, if I had known that somebody had said that to you or they were treating you like that, I would have absolutely stepped in. And they said, well, Dad, you were busy. You were under a lot of stress. We didn't want to bother you with it. And I said, oh, I'm sorry, I dropped the ball on that. I wish you had. But a simple apology in time really helps. I told my kids, forgive me for not being clued into that. You're right. I was stressed. There was a lot going on in my life at the time, but you should have been my priority. Now, were the incidents that happened with them, life altering? No, there were little things that I could have done better. Same thing with Mom. There's little things that she missed along the way, but that's part of the what we call the fishbowl of church. You'd understand that as a PK. Yeah. You were in that fishbowl and everybody's coming around and looking at you all the time. Is Phil chewing gum? He shouldn't be chewing gum. He looks sideways. I think, we need to snitch on him and tell. And that sort of scrutiny in a kid's life is not healthy for them. You need to be a kid, and kids make mistakes and they do stuff. They do crazy stuff from time to time, and you need to be a normal kid. But at the same time, none of them grew up to resent the church or to resent the Lord. They're good kids. They took it in stride.
That's amazing that the Lord has blessed you with 8 children who love God. You've married a godly lady, a teammate, a helpmate in many respects. Not only as a pastor, not only as a person in the military and the Navy, but also now, 30 plus years as an airline pilot. And what led you to that transition from going from the Navy to going into commercial airlines?
So, virtually every military pilot that doesn't make it a career looks at some level at being a commercial airline pilot. It's easy on the family, much easier than the military was, at least. The pay is very substantial, and It's a lifestyle where you don't take work home with you. So with the military, you definitely take work home with you at night. In the airlines, when I'm done, I'm done. I come home. So if I work a 12-day or 13-day month at the airline, the other 18 days are mine. And that's nice. And so there's lots of advantages of that. It's not for everybody. But we looked at it very hard and said, hey, you know what? We can minister more as an airline pilot than I could if I stayed in the military and I moved every year and a half because we wanted to put some roots down, or if I went into full-time ministry, because essentially we planted a church up in Maine because I was an airline pilot. So I could have a full-time income, only work a few days a month because I bid reserve at the airline while I was pastoring the church, which meant I worked about 6 days a month, still got a regular salary. And the church didn't have to pay me anything. So that's a great blessing to a church to get a full-time senior pastor with a seminary education that you don't have to pay. They didn't pay me for the whole 10 years I was there. I never got paid.
Oh.
So we were able to plow some of that money back into building a building, hiring other staff, doing other things with that money that we wouldn't have normally otherwise been able to do had I not had that extra job being an airline pilot.
Oh, that's an amazing testimony. I mean, you used a profession,
right,
and you were bivocational for 10 years. Not even bivocational in a sense. You did 2 full-time jobs. And what was the process behind that? What was the Lord doing in your heart to make that type of commitment to a church for a decade and not ask for anything in return?
Well, I think part of it's a little bit of it was selfish. I mean, to be honest, without the salary from the church, I'm also a little on the independent side. In other words, I was freer to make some decisions than I would have been otherwise. And people that are in full-time ministry, that is your livelihood. And so you've got to, what are you going to do if you fail at that job? If you get let go from a mission board, you get let go from a church, you got to go out and find a position someplace else, having just been let go from a church. And there may be a variety of different reasons why somebody is let go, or they just didn't mesh, or it just wasn't the right position for them. I had freedom to not worry about that as much. And as a result, it really was a benefit to the church. In northern New England, there's a certain amount of respect given to somebody who is bivocational. They believe that you've been around the block a time or two, and you're not, and I hate to put it this way, but you're not just a pastor. Now, I understand from being a pastor, that was the hardest job I ever had. It was the most stressful job I ever had. But for your congregation and the people, they're very hardy people up there. They work really hard. They live on next to nothing. They will give you a bump up in the respect level if you're a hard worker too. And they feel like, hey, this guy gets his hands dirty, or he's got a stressful job on the side in addition to ministering to us. So that was a benefit to the ministry. And so for 10 years, it didn't seem like I didn't need the salary. So why not just plow it back into the church? It made more sense.
That's a really good word. I think a lot of seminary students, their ideal is that they get a full-time position, right? And not so much wanting to do bivocational, but the lion's share of pastors aren't bivocational. And for you to talk about a bivocational ministry in that way, I think is very much an encouragement. It is for me, because my dad was bivocational as well. He got a seminary degree, was thinking about doing a doctorate, whole 9 yards. But New England pastor, right? There is something there to that.
There is.
And that is with the way that you did that, I think is amazing. Mm-hmm. I want to ask you. I don't want to talk too much about this because I know I'm going to link to the video, but you transitioned, you were a pilot as a pastor, and 9/11 happened. And 9/11 that is my JFK in a sense, right? That is what as a Gen X person, that is what I remember. Can you talk just a little bit about what happened with you in 9/11, or what didn't happen?
Sure. So I finished my first master's degree in seminary in 1999. And in early 2000, friends of ours from up in Maine sent me a letter, said, hey, we understand you just graduated from seminary and we're interested in starting a church up here in Maine. I had been on active duty up there years before. And they said, would you consider moving back to Maine to help us start a church? And so one thing led to another, and I did. So we moved up to Maine. We planted the church in July of 2000. September 11th is 2001. So that's going to be 15 or 14 months later. So I'm doing the pilot thing. I'm starting the church. The church is growing. We're doing well, a lot of work, but hey, it's very rewarding. And so now we're coming to September of 2001. And in order to be more full-time at the church than I would have been otherwise, I bid reserve at the airline. So the reserve meant I was on call to fill in for a pilot that was sick or their car broke down or they went to training. For whatever reason, they always want to have a pilot assigned to a trip. So there's a percentage of us, probably about 10% on the list, that are on call. And a lot of guys don't like call. It goes very junior. The reason they don't like it is because of the unpredictability. You can't have a beer at night with your dinner because you might get called to go to work. I'm not a beer drinker. I don't drink, so that's no big deal to me. But it allowed me to do the church full time. So being on reserve, the September 11th rolls around. September 10th is a date that means more to me than September 11th because I was coming on call on the 11th. And so I knew I was having days of availability and I could be pegged for a trip. On the 10th in the afternoon, I went to the computer and logged in like I normally do to see if there was any open flying for the next day. And sure enough, there was one trip open on September 11th, and it was American Airlines Flight 11. That was the first airplane that got hijacked on September 11th. I didn't know that on the 10th. Nobody knew that on the 10th. So I looked down the list of available pilots that could fill that flight, and there was only one, and that was me. So having been through this drill a bunch of times, the computer is automatically going to assign my name to that trip. And then somewhere around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a real person is going to call you from the airline and say, just want to let you know, you were assigned a trip for tomorrow. Here's the trip details. And then once that phone call gets made, it's a done deal. Nobody can bump you. It's your trip. So I looked in the computer, and sure enough, the computer had already assigned my name to the trip. I told my wife I'm going to Los Angeles tomorrow. I went and packed my bags. I set my alarm clock to get up early in the morning, and I waited for the phone to ring, which was the last step in the process. And the phone never rang, which was very unusual. And so about 7 o'clock that night, I was, thinking, hey, did they ever call? And I looked on my phone, and there was no call. And I asked my wife, sometimes they call her by mistake. Nope. So I went back to the computer. I logged in like I did. And sure enough, there was somebody else's name on that trip. They had erased my name, and some other guy's name was on there. But I don't care. No big deal. I still get paid to stay home. So it's no big deal until the next day, right? So the next day, since I had the day off, I went into the Navy. I was doing some work as a reserve officer there at the Navy base. And I'm watching 9/11 like everybody else on the TV. One airplane after another is being hijacked, and it's horrible. And the first one was American Airlines. I never connected the dots that was the airplane that I was supposed to have been on. And it was later on that evening, once I finally got off the base and came home, my phone was blowing up all day because everybody in the church wanted to make sure I wasn't the pilot on that trip. So we reassured everybody, no, Steve's on the ground, don't worry. And we had a prayer meeting at our house. We had about 60 people over to our house that night to prayed for our country. And then after everybody went home, I went around the corner and got onto my computer again to see if I could bring up the names of the crew members on that flight. Still hadn't connected that was the one I packed my bags for, right? So they had scrubbed all the names off of it. But when the screen came up in front of me, it looked exactly like it did 24 hours earlier when I had been looking at it, and my name was on the trip. And when I saw that visual look at the screen, I was just dumbfounded. It still is it's hard to express the feeling. And I just stood there and stared at the screen. And a couple of minutes later, the fair and lovely, Mrs. Captain Steeeve came around the corner, and she said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Remember I told you I was going to Los Angeles today?" And she said, "Yeah." I said, "That was the first airplane that got hijacked this morning." Yeah. And so we held each other for a little bit. um, there's still an empty feeling, empty space where a feeling belongs. I don't know how to describe it. It's just, yeah. So
Mm.
having been through that moment in life, you realize that you're living on borrowed time. We all are, in fact, but I know it very dramatically because I can see my smoking hole and it was on TV. And you can't just go back to an ordinary existence after that. You've got to there's got to be some sharper focus in your life. Now remember, I was pastoring a church. I was doing God's work. I was doing everything I thought the Lord wanted me to do at the time, and in fact, I was. But the Lord had something else in mind for me later on down the road that I would have never seen, and it was after pastoring. I thought I was going to pastor forever. And he allowed me to stay there for 10 years. But then he turned my testimony into a documentary. And that documentary went viral around the world. And for the last now 14 years, I've been traveling everywhere showing that 15-minute In My Seat documentary and sharing the gospel. And I've shared it in places I would have never been invited to had I not been the pilot that was originally scheduled on the flight but got bumped.
Mm. Yeah, that is, it's an amazing testimony, and well, again, we're going to link it down below. But one of the things, just for the viewers that maybe haven't listened to it or watched it yet, the pilot, the person who took your place, was also a believer,
Correct.
and that is so. There's you talk about it in your video about the idea of Christ being our substitute, and the idea of the beauty of propitiation, and you make that connection. And then you also talk about reconnecting with the pilot's family. How that must have been a bit challenging and a bit just. I mean, it must have. I mean, how did that all go? How do you process that?
Well, I've only spoken. I spoke to Tom McGinnis, is the pilot who bumped me, and I've spoken to Tom's widow once, very briefly, on the phone. But basically, back after about a year or two after 9/11, I was still trying to piece together all the details. Like I'm sharing with you all the details now because I've said it so many times and it's been so many years. But early on, it was like, why did I not get that trip? Well, how did somebody bump me? Right? I spoke with her briefly. It was understandably a very awkward conversation. She had no idea of my existence or that I was originally scheduled on the trip. So we talked briefly. I've talked to her son, Tom Jr., a couple times over the years. Usually on September 11th every year, I'll just send him a text and say, hey, man, I'm thinking about you. By the way, Tom Jr. followed in his dad's footsteps, and he is a pilot at American Airlines.
Hmm.
And so I think that's a wonderful story that he followed in his dad's footsteps. But, one of the things that family wanted to do was to kind of close that chapter after a while. And so I think she wrote a book, and I think she and Tom Jr. traveled a little while telling the story. But at some point, they needed to close that chapter and move on. So they have. But I reassured them. I said, look, I tell your dad's story 30 or 40 times a year. So his story, his testimony is well covered through the In My Seat documentary.
Hmm. Okay, let's move on to something a little bit lighter.
Yes.
So you have traveled to a lot of different airports in a lot of different places. What's one place you haven't traveled that you'd like to travel to? Say just an airport or a place just in general.
Wow. Okay. That's a great question. I haven't been asked that before. So this November, my wife and I are scheduled to speak at a homeschool conference in Japan. So we're going to Tokyo and Osaka. I've never been to Japan, so I'm really looking forward to that. Never really been. I went to Singapore once when I met the USS Roosevelt over there, but it was just like a fly in, fly out thing. I would love to go to the Far East. And then the other place that my wife would love to go to is the Grand Canyon. We've never really been out and traveled. I fly over a lot of things, but I don't ever stop and like look around. So retirement for me is coming up in a few months. We're hoping to get some time to go do that. So I'd say number one on her bucket list is the Grand Canyon. Number two on mine is somewhere over in the Far East.
The Grand Canyon. My brother is a clinical psychologist. He works for the in for the Veterans Administration. He does a lot of work with military veterans. He lives a couple hours away, so if you decide to do that, please, we can have. He has a place you can stay. Not that you don't want the hotel. I'm sure you don't have any problem with that, but there's places all around that people would love. We could get you a place to stay if that's something you want to do.
Absolutely. Right.
You've been in ministry now for good, 30 years or so. God saved you in high school, senior year in high school. What's one thing you know now that you wish you would have known earlier in your ministry career?
Well, I got a good introduction to my ministry career. The guy who led me to Christ, within really weeks after me getting saved, was starting to talk to me about ministry and reaching out to investing in the lives of young people and so forth. And so, like I said, I went to college for about a year, came back, and immediately got plugged into ministry, and realized, how important that is to serve others in that capacity. I think looking back over my shoulder now, the lessons learned or the things I wished I had known or the advice I could give to maybe men or women coming out of seminary or getting involved in ministry is don't feel like you have to have a seminary level degree or have to be a doctorate in something to minister. I was most of my ministry career about a quarter step ahead of whoever it was that I was discipling. And that was really valuable. And learning to say the answer, I don't know, but let's look it up together. That's really important. And so there were times where, I kind of got shoved out there, not being too far ahead of the person I was discipling. It wasn't common knowledge to them, but at the same time, it was very challenging for me. I had to work hard to stay ahead of the people that I was having a Bible study with, or the guys I was meeting with for a prayer time on, Tuesday morning at 5:30, or, whatever the venue was. So I think you don't have to, we're always, here's one of my criticisms of the church culture in general. And I know that because I've been immersed in it my whole life. It seems like the church and a lot of ministries, we're always preparing to prepare to prepare. And we never get around to the actual doing of the doing of the doing. Right. So we form a committee and we get together and we have meetings. Like I call it death by meeting. We have a lot of death by meeting, and then we prepare a thing and then we put it together, and then we never get around to actual doing. And I think all the time and effort and exhaustion that we put into preparing, you could just go knock on the door next door and have a conversation with your neighbor, right? And get to know them. Right? Strike up a conversation with somebody in the line at the grocery store, and say, hey, would you ever want to get together sometime? You seem like a decent person. Why don't we go out to dinner sometime? And you build relationships, and that's what it's about. And we spend all this time researching the next model or the next thing that's going to work. And you could just go out and share Christ. So I've been a big fan of that over the years, and the Lord's rewarded it, at least in my life.
You also have developed a program on leadership. I believe it's called Character Health, if I got that correctly. What led you to that, and what was the emphasis behind you developing something like this?
Well, that's the name of our ministry. It's Character Health, and you can find us at characterhealth.com. And we do marriage, parenting, and now counseling ministry for folks. And it's all solidly Bible-based. But when I was I was writing my dissertation for my doctorate. I was in the chapter. I was talking about America's obsession with emotional health and well-being and with physical health and well-being. In other words, people will go to the extremes to get to get in shape, and they'll join church, fitness club memberships and all that stuff. And then the whole self-esteem movement over the last 40 years, we have to feel good about ourselves, and we have to be in touch with our inner person and all that kind of stuff. And we're obsessed with those things. And the big ingredient that was missing was character. Right? We're suffering from a lack of character in this country. Look at the political environment. Look at here's what I call the new virtue these days. And I wrote about this in my dissertation. The new virtue these days isn't whether you should or shouldn't do something. It's whether you can or can't do something. Is it legal? Will I get away with it? How much trouble will I get into if I get caught? We constantly ask the can and can't questions of life when we should be asking the should and shouldn't questions of life. Is this the right thing to do? Should I do this? How does this benefit my fellow man? Paul would put it this way. The Apostle Paul would say, all things are permissible, but not all things are profitable. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And so if we ask the should and shouldn't questions a little bit more often, we'd get out of the can and can't world, and life would be much more satisfying. And ministry, I think, would be much more effective. So the character health ministry was designed to drive home character development in families, marriages, children. And now I've got a course called Character Driven Leadership, where we teach into what it looks like to be driven, to be a leader who's character driven. Because you can be driven by a bunch of things. You can be a coercive leader. You can be a charismatic leader. You can be a passive type of leader, or you can be a character-driven leader. You like working for people that have good character. If somebody is truly humble, you really like working with and for them. That person will get the most out of the people that work with them, as opposed to a coercive leader that'll get the bare minimum out of people.
Now, how have you transferred all your leadership style to you being in the airlines for 30 or so years? Because you're in the secular world. You can't go give everyone you meet a track or share the 4 spiritual laws with them. But even with me, when I was watching some of your videos, there was something unique about you, and I couldn't put my finger on it. So I did more research. How does that work in the airline industry with you?
Yeah, it's a little bit of a dance. I mean, you got to be careful with it. You don't want to be overly preachy, and I think that's off-putting on some level. At the same time, the same ministry that we used, the same approach that we used in Young Life, which was earning the right to be heard with people. So that means building good relationships with them, getting to know about them, their family, what is important to them and what isn't important to them, listening to them. Most people just want to be heard in life on some level. If you're good at those skills, you become winsome to that person. And that's the winsomeness of Christ. Steeeve is not naturally that guy. I have become that guy because of my relationship with Christ, because I'm striving to become more like Jesus. Jesus is that ultimate winsome person that you would be attracted to at first. You wouldn't exactly know why. You'd go, I don't know, there's something different about this guy. He's bugging me. I got to ask him why. And you'd start talking to him. He would start listening to you, and you'd go, oh, he listened to me. And all of a sudden, he becomes your new best friend. And in that, he has now earned the right to be heard. And now he can share with you the goodness of God. And so that's kind of the formula over the years. I hate to put that word to it, but over the years, I want to be somebody that's winsome. I'll try to make this as brief an example as possible. I teach on second mile leadership, and Matthew 5:41 is a wonderful counterintuitive verse that says, if you're forced to go 1 mile, go with that person 2 miles, right? It's the principle of going the extra mile. So the illustration I use is, imagine that you're a father and you've got 2 sons, you own a vineyard. You say to your boys, we're going to get out in the vineyard about 5 o'clock in the morning. And you go out, you're working in the vineyard at 5 o'clock in the morning. About 9 o'clock in the morning, when it's time to go and get a break, you hear a hubbub off in the distance. And it's this legion of Roman soldiers coming right through your vineyard. And pretty soon, 2 of those Roman soldiers, point to you guys and go, hey, you guys, come with us. You're forced by law. You're compelled with them to go 1 mile. You know that as a Jew, you have to obey the law and you have to go with them 1 mile. It's the worst possible timing. You don't want to do it. Everybody's in a bad mood. So you go with them for this 1 mile, and they're having you pull their stuff and carry their things. And the boys are thinking, okay, at the end of the mile, we're done. You turn to your boys and you say, hey, boys, follow Dad's lead. We're going to do something different today. And they go, what is that? Just trust me, son. Let's do it. And you go, okay. And you go more than a mile. And at 1.25 miles, the 2 Roman guys are looking at each other because they've paced off how far a mile is. And they know that you're legally can leave, but you've stayed with it. And they're like, do these guys know they're past 1 mile? And the other guy goes, stop. It's fine. Let them go. I don't care how long they go. So you go 1.5 miles, you go 1.75 miles. Now you get to this 2 mile mark and they can't contain themselves anymore. So one of the Roman guys looks at you and goes, hey, you know you don't have to go more than a mile, right? And you turn around and you go, yeah, I know. And you keep going. At that point, they can't contain themselves. They're like, okay, why are you doing this? And that's where you turn around to these people who were once your enemy and you look at them and you say, can I tell you about a guy named Jesus Christ? Now, who started that conversation, you or them? It was them. But you won them over by going the extra mile. And so it's inconvenient, it's rude, it's never the right timing, but going the extra mile will always open up a much easier conversation to share the gospel than if you try to come up with some clever way to force your way into that conversation, right? So over the years, lots of guys that I fly with, gals that I fly with as well, they'll say, hey, there's something different about you. What is that? And we just talk about the Lord.
Yeah, that may be the best formula out there, right? You don't need all these formulas outside of, just go the extra mile, right? And people will know you by your love for one another, or they'll know you by your actions. And that is that is a very, very wise way to look at things.
Jesus knew what he was talking about, didn't he?
He did.
Yeah.
And
He did.
and there's just something, we don't need all these, hey, look, I got a double PhD, so I get the education, but sometimes, right, you need to have what seminary is different than a divinity school, right? That's why.
Yep.
You also talk a little bit about mental health in the airline industry. You're coming from a Christian viewpoint. How does your Christian worldview impact when you talk about mental health in among pilots?
Well, I think the whole notion of shepherding other people and looking out for, serving others, all of that stuff is the whole nature of the Christian faith is counterintuitive to the rest of the world. The rest of the world says, look out for yourself, look out for number one, make sure you take care of yourself. The Christian faith is serve your brother, right? And so the treat your, it's Matthew 22:36-39. And it's basically, it's being a blessing to others, but the exact wording is escaping me now. See, this is the seniority sticking in there at this point. But at any rate, we're to serve others. And as you do that translates into, it ought to translate into your work life as well. And so, what I encourage other pilots to do is just look out for your fellow pilots. Just have a genuine conversation. Say, hey, how you doing today? Everything okay at home? Right? Ready to go flying today? Because if there's a day that you're not ready to go flying and you can't leave home at home, then maybe you should go flying an airplane because it's very stressful. And that airplane is a hunk of metal that doesn't care that you're having a bad day. It doesn't care about what's going on at your home. It's going to give you a check ride at the worst possible moment. And you've got to be mentally and emotionally fit for that moment. You can't be dealing with other stuff and fall apart at that moment. You got to be on your A game.
That's a good word. I remember we've done a number of flights, and one of the things I remember, our son, by the time he was before he was 4, he'd been on 100 flights just because of the work we were doing overseas. So it's always comforting to hear pilots who love their job and those who love the Lord, and having people like you in the industry is very much a blessing. Right. If you could give someone going into ministry or in a seminary, if you give them one piece of advice just starting out, what would that advice be?
Well, beyond finding the right life partner, because my wife is absolutely the thing that made it all work. And finding, I married somebody that loves Jesus more than she loves me or anything else in this world. And that's hugely important. I think, the principle of just keep it simple. You do have to look out for yourself on some level. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've been talking about being others oriented and so forth. But at the same time, you also have to look out for your own health. There was a point in time where, as a pastor, I just hit the wall emotionally. And the church was doing great. There was nothing wrong. The church was growing. Relationships were really good. I don't know if it was just exhaustion or what it was, but darkness. I started to experience a lot of darkness in my life. And so I had to reach out and have some people help walk me through that and talk me through that. And there are people out there that will help you with that. There's no shame in doing that. The shame is trying to do it yourself. So I think, having a good appraisal of yourself and then always keeping the most important things, which is, Jesus, the two things that kind of drove Jesus was he had a deep and abiding love for God the Father that drove every one of his decisions. And he had a deep and abiding love for us, which was the object of his passion. So he had a focus of giving to us, but he also had his priorities right, which was he always wanted to make the Father happy. And so he had to know his word, the word of God. He had to know the Bible. He had to make some hard choices in life that sometimes displeased the people in front of him, but it always pleased the Lord. Those are hard choices to make in life, but sometimes in ministry we have to make those hard choices.
Now, you've been saved for close to 50 years now. You're saved right around 17, 18. You're close to 65.
No.
You've read a lot of works. You have a doctorate. You've been to seminary. You've been in the military. Is there one book or maybe two that you would recommend people to read? For example, a lot of people in my generation, Generation X, they're into like Piper's Let the Nations Be Glad. Some are like Cost of Discipleship. Is there any like a book that that's been most helpful for you in your walk with Christ outside the Bible?
Yeah, it's hard to pin it down to just one. I think a bigger picture would be read a lot, read everything. That's going to be, and read things that you don't necessarily agree with, right? Those things are important. But to answer your question, I'd say there's probably three books. It's hard to bring it down to three books. Pilgrim's Progress.
Yep.
Okay. Sorry. Pilgrim's Progress, the second best-selling book in the world after the Bible. The Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis.
Yep.
Right now, and here's my tip on Mere Christianity: get the audiobook version of it and listen to it. C.S. Lewis originally wrote that book as they were actually radio programs that he was doing on the BBC, and then they took all those radio programs and compiled it into a book. When you listen to somebody read the book, it just opens up to you because they were originally radio programs. And then I'd say there's a book called From Forgiven to Forgiving. I think forgiveness is really lacking in our world. A Jay Adams book, From Forgiven to Forgiving. That's way up towards the top of my list.
Have you, by chance, read the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis? Yes, that is. That's another one by him. That is.
See, again, you can't. There's not just one book. It's, the list is like this long for me. But anything by C.S. Lewis is awesome. Screwtape Letters is really wonderful because of the way it's written, and it's
I was had a class I was preparing on spiritual warfare a little while ago, and I ended up connecting with N.T. Wright, who is an Anglican guy. He was a friend of a friend. He emailed him, and he. And one of the things that he said was that, he taught a class on it. He's like, I experienced more spiritual warfare in preparing the class than I probably have in any other time in my life. When we talk about C.S. Lewis, Screwtape Letters, has there been a time in your life where you've had this? Like, I'm anything but charismatic in my understanding of things, and I think there's. But what Lewis says in Screwtape Letters is you can believe there's a demon behind everything, or you can be the opposite and be quite naturalistic in your thought. Has there been a time in your life where you've had that intense spiritual warfare, and what did you do to how did the Lord just take you out of that?
Well, spiritual warfare is a real thing. I think my approach to everything in life is to have a balanced biblical approach. Right? It's easy to get out of balance, and there's always the fad of the day. People get all excited about one thing or another. There are people that, like, for instance, in our counseling ministry, we train other people to be counselors. You will never get certified through our organization if you think that there's a demon behind every behavior. There might be some demonic activity in life, but there's not a demon of laziness, and there's not a demon of, the next thing, right? That it's too easy to just marginalize your own choices and blame it on a demon. So those are the things that are kind of out of balance. The biblical balance is there are demons and there are demonic influences. You need to make wise choices in life to not expose yourself to those things. So the dark things that you ingest, garbage in, garbage out, right? That's just common sense. The proverb basically says this: the wise man sees the danger that lay ahead and he does something to avoid it. And so God wants us to be wise. He wants us to be wise in Christ. And he wants to build a mind in us where we see the danger that's out ahead. And instead of falling into that trap over and over again, and that danger might be our own sin appetites. So you have to be kind of aware of your own sin appetites and stop doing the same thing over and over again, hoping for a better outcome. But do something to avoid it. Be proactive in your walk with Christ. So I think if you stay in the light and you stay away from the dark things of life, if you're feeding on things that aren't godly influences, you can expect some bad results from those things if you feed on those. And the counterbalance to that is make sure you're in the Word, you've got a active prayer life, and that you're serving others. You love your neighbor as yourself. That kind of principle. That's the Matthew 22 principle I was trying to talk to you about before. Is I love myself a lot, but I need to look out for the needs of my neighbor. That'll keep your focus in the right direction.
You're going to be turning 65 here in a little bit, and if I understand, at 65, there's some type of policy, I think, with commercial airlines that is mandatory retirement. I know each organization has, I guess, there's a mandatory retirement, I believe, at 65 for airline pilots. What happens next to Captain Steeeve? You've been doing this for flying for 40 years. What happens next?
Well, after I have a good long cry, and I recover from that, I don't know. It's 3 months away now, and it's preoccupying my thoughts because this is what I've done my whole adult life. So it is going to be a transition, and it's not a smooth one. Mm-hmm. You don't get to go like part-time for a little while or consult as an airline pilot. One day you're the captain of the biggest airplane at the biggest airline in the world, and the next day after your birthday, they won't even let you in the airport unless you buy a ticket. Oh. So that's pretty drastic. But the upside of it is you do know it's coming, right? So, I know this day is coming. I can prepare for it. What's really occupying my time these days is the Captain Steeeve YouTube and TikTok channels. So this has been a total surprise, but about 12 months ago, my son, who's a professional filmmaker, said, "Dad, take your phone out when you're at work and make me a couple short videos of what you do as a pilot." Well, one thing led to another, and now Captain Steeeve has become a whole thing. It's a full-time job. So if I was looking for what I was going to do in retirement, it found me. And Captain Steeeve is just a load of fun, but we're going to branch out in some other channels. So after the first of the year, we're going to do a Dr. Steeeve channel, where Seminary Dr. Steeeve is going to have a faith-based channel where we share the gospel and talk about the Lord. And but we've already built an audience on the Captain Steeeve side. Some of those people will come over because they want to know more about me, or they want to know more about the Lord. There'll be an opportunity for them to do that. So, we've got a lot of really promising things in retirement. I'm thinking that retirement is going to be as busy or busier than it was when I was an active pilot. So hopefully it'll help me drown my sorrows of not flying a big jet anymore and just being a YouTube influencer. It makes me laugh every time I say that.
Well, it is. I was going to ask you, what can we at Gateway Seminary, this podcast promote? How can we promote your ministry? How can people help you in your ministry?
Well, pray for us. Go to look at characterhealth.com and look at our stuff and see if there's any parenting or marriage resources that you might need. Certainly, if there's counseling that you need, you can click the link there and send us the Contact Us tab comes straight to us. We do a lot of counseling, especially people that are in ministry. That's our specialty, because my wife and I have been in ministry our whole lives, and we understand the unique pressures there. So again, reach out. We would love to have a conversation with you. It's no cost to start with. And the first conversation is free. And the nice thing about us is that I'm not in your circle of influence. I'm not going to see you at church on Sunday. I'm not going to be at your seminary this week. I'm somebody that you can trust, that you can talk to about the Lord. But if you want to bare your soul, you can do that and not feel like, you're going to be embarrassed to see me in a couple of days. So that's a way, but absolutely pray for us. That would be huge. And just pray for this whole Captain Steeeve endeavor, that it becomes more than just a fun thing to do on the internet, but it becomes a ministry opportunity where we can lead people to Christ.
I saw your interview, I think your first interview with Piers Morgan as well. And I was like, with the whole tragedy with the Air India flight, and I was like, you obviously have such a wealth of experience. Have you thought about going into as a seminary professor? You have the qualifications. There's so much you could do in stuff that you'd want to, but you have a lot of other things going on. But you have such an ability. I would love for other people to experience that.
Yeah, there's only so many hours in a day, right? And so, the whole YouTube thing, it's a full-time job, making the videos and getting them out there. So, we would like to enjoy a little bit of our retirement, but I always intended to work. I always intended to work until I step into glory someday. So the Lord knows that about me. He wired me that way. We're putting out more and more stuff on the character health side, that people can get a hold of resources that would fill that need of being a seminary professor. The only downside of being a seminary professor is you have to be in a building at a certain time, reliably. And that's not how my life has been set up at this point.
Yeah. Another thing about the character, one of the things I've done a lot of work with missionaries and seen a lot of from different organizations, and having somewhere you can go that's apart from your organization, I think is really, really wise, because it allows you that disconnect in that objectivity that sometimes you can't get within your own organization. So thank you for sharing that. I think that'd be helpful for a lot of people. Steeeve, thank you so much for your time. I'll stop recording right now, but I do wanted to say thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. Appreciate the invite.